Hey guys, how are ya? The purpose of this video is to do a quick comparison on the throwing knife against the cutlass. Obviously, with the introduction of the new weapons, we're all kind of wondering where they stack against each other and what the benefits are of using them. If you're like me and you've traditionally always used the cutlass in either the blunderbuss or the eye of reach, then this is probably a new kind of thing that you've got to consider, considering the throwing knives are a bit of a hybrid between the pistol and the cutlass, given their dual ability to be thrown and also used as a knife. So what we've done is we've done a bit of a damage analysis. As you can see, we're running them on a 5-second count to see how much damage we can do. The throwing knife has three functions, which is the first is the quick stab. As you can see, in 5 seconds we get 7 shots away. So with that, 7 at 14 damage gives us 1.4 hits a second, or just under 20 damage a second, which is pretty good, and it looks pretty efficient. So next up, it's got a heavy attack. The heavy attack is obviously a lot slower, deals a little bit more damage, deals about 70 damage. So what we find is that it will pull off 3 hits at 70 damage, which gives us 0.6 hits a second, or 42 damage a second. So compare that to the quick stab, it's twice as good in the damage per second range. Finally, we know that the throwing knives can obviously be thrown, hence their name. When they're thrown, they're obviously extremely accurate, as you can tell by my grouping, but also they're really fast. So we get away 4. I thought we might get away a 5th, but unfortunately no. So 4 of them at 65 damage gives us 0.8 hits a second, or close to 52 damage a second, which is pretty effective. So once again, that's 52, the heavy strike was 42, and the quick stab was 19.6 damage a second. The damage of these is also backed up by the information on Rare Thief. If you, like me, are a data geek and you want to check my sources, then it's right there on the screen for you, or you can go check it out for yourself. What's really important is to obviously compare it to the status quo. So what we're going to do is compare it against the Cutlass. I like the Sovereign Cutlass, but that's just me. I like the way it's gold. Um, it's a quick weapon. We obviously managed to get away 5, 1 a second. At 25 damage a strike, that gives us, what, 25 damage a second, which is pretty effective. Against the quick stab of the knives, that was 19.6, so it's a little bit more. And it's obviously not as good as the heavy strike on the knives, which was 42. So it sits in the middle, a little bit closer on the lower side. Up next is the sword lunge itself, and from here we're actually going to play with the data a little bit, because otherwise it's a little bit boring. You'll see it takes 5 seconds to get away the one sword lunge, which essentially means it's 12 damage per second, which just isn't that interesting. So what we're going to do is treat it as if the first hit is a hit in itself, i.e. you managed to surprise them, so theoretically your first hit is 60. So if we're going to stack these in order of the two to have a full comparison, we can obviously see that the damage and damage per second of the sword lunge is the biggest, but it's also got the biggest risks on the other side, because we all know that when you do it, you stop for a bit and you can be attacked. Um, we can also see that it's quite a big gap between the top and the bottom, with the 19 and 25 at the bottom being quite far away. What's interesting is if we extrapolate it into total hits required to kill based off your enemy having 100 health, we can then work out time to kill as well. So as we can see, if you can hit 2 throwing knives in a row, that's the fastest way to kill someone, which is great, followed by 3 hits from a heavy knife stab. Interestingly, they're both from the same weapon, which is quite an interesting one. But what we actually find is that people tend to use combos. You wouldn't go in and do 2 sword lunges, because that's too slow and too dangerous. So if we use a sword lunge followed by a couple sword slashes, or a throwing knife followed by a heavy stab and a quick stab, what's also really interesting is that we find that it's 2.8 seconds to kill with a throwing knife combo, then 3 seconds with a sword combo, which is super interesting. It's also important to consider that the sword has other benefits. For example, one, you can block, which is very effective in combat. That'll keep you safe from your enemy having swords, or your enemy throwing knives at you. The other important thing is that you can actually block step, which is when you block with your sword and jump to one side, which gives you really quick mobility in a battle. So you can jump behind your enemy and then attack him from the rear. All right, so what does this all mean for you? I think it comes down to personal play style and what you're trying to do. If I'm doing a tall tale, I'm still going to use my sword because I enjoy sword lunging and killing skellies that way. If I'm doing some PvP, I'm going to probably introduce the knives just because I like the ability to strike first with the quick slash because it's obviously the fastest way to attack. And just the combination offered by having the three attack types. I think that sounds real cool. Anyway, throw your thoughts in. Let's have a yarn. Cheers.